My name is Jason Pickard, and I currently serve as the REF International Campus Minister at Texas A&M. We started, my wife and I and my children, we started that ministry in July of 2011, so we finished up our fourth year and about to head into year number 5. And I grew up in Texas, and I went to A&M, and so after some time in Philadelphia going to seminary and interning at a church there, we came back to begin the work that they were looking to start there. So that's what we're doing. It's challenging, of course, like all ministry is, but it's a lot of fun interacting with the scholars from all over the world. So. Yeah, I think there is a need for the emphasis on holiness just in general, but especially for the pastors. And I know the leadership is so important. And, I think we live in such a day and age where we really want to relate to our culture and to be heard by people, but sometimes that can go a little too far. I think there's some great things that come out of the ideas of being authentic and being honest with people, especially a lot of us grew up in more moralistic backgrounds, but I think there's a fine line between being authentic in a biblical way and then just following our culture. So I think the emphasis on holiness for the pastor is very important. I guess I would say that the antinomian danger is a little bit greater in our day. Some of that I think would depend upon your context and just even your culture and your church context. But obviously they both would be wrong errors, and we could talk about how in some ways they're strange cousins. But yeah, I do think the emphasis is needed on the life of the pastor. Absolutely. Yeah, I think the pastor's piety and his pursuit of holiness does play a huge role in the congregation. And if you think back to the Old Testament, in King David, as the leader of the nation went, so went the nation. And now I think we have to be careful and say that even using that Old Testament example, the people themselves were still responsible for their own sin and lack of holiness. But yet it's true that the way that the leader led had huge implications. And I think that carries through into the New Testament and down into the ministry today. As of course we all follow Jesus, but as the pastors are the under shepherds to lead the flock, I think that is very, very important. I think it plays out in the leadership of the congregation and the way that you lead, the way you interact with people. And speaking more specifically to what I do with mainly graduate students, international students from around the world who usually are a little bit older and they're mainly graduate students, they're coming to us by and large from two contexts. If I can narrow it down, it's hard to put them in two categories, but we have a lot of non-Christian students, and a lot of the students that we have are moralistic. And so the temptation with the moralistic students is just really to focus on grace, which they need to hear, but they also need to see piety taught and modeled in a grace-based way. And really, even evangelistically, I think the life of the pastor has a lot of implications outside of the congregation, if you will, but even for the outsider. We do a lot of hospitality, having a lot of people in our home. And so just the students getting to see how I respond when my 3-year-old throws a fit in the middle of Bible study. And just simple things like that, but really can reveal what's inside of us. And, I'm not perfect. Part of the piety is saying I was wrong and leading with repentance. But I think that those examples and people seeing you live out what you've been teaching is very important. Yeah, sure. And for me, one of the big things, and I will confess up front that my by nature, my personality is I'm a pretty disciplined guy. I've always been an early riser, but for me, I try every day, and I'm pretty consistent of starting my day before anyone else in my family. I'm up first, brewing coffee. I need a little bit of help, but also sitting down and trying to read through the scriptures and pray. And also taking some time at the end of the day, whether it's right before I go home or right before I go to bed, to go back to the scriptures. And I found that to be vital. I mean, just to be in the scriptures and to be trying to commune with God as hard as it is, outside of the conversations you're having with people or outside of the Bible studies and sermons that you're preparing. I need that. And, I'm not perfect. I miss days here and there, but I just have found that that's vital. And another thing I try to do is also lead the family It's really hard. My kids are fairly young, so it's hard to figure out what exasperating my kids looks like. And I didn't come from a home that does that. So full confession is that's actually a hard practice for me. But I do think it's important that my family knows that I get up early and read the Bible, that they see that I lead them by trying to have short family devotions and those conversations, even though my kids are young. So I'm definitely in tune to that. And of course, conversation with my wife and praying with my wife. And one thing that I do is, I have I have some time to read during the week, and I'm working with bright graduate students, so I do a fair amount of academic reading still. I went to Westminster, so I guess I'm a bit of the egghead. But one thing that I really try to do is to make sure that throughout the week, if it's at the gym, I'm listening to sermons. I found that to be a great help. And, on Sundays, it doesn't have to be the only thing I do or read, but try to read something a little more practical. Recently I've been reading, actually, maybe it's because I knew I was going to do this, I don't know, but I've been reading through J.I. Packer's Rediscovering Holiness. So reading through some sermons, listening to sermons, so kind of all those things taken in a week is how I approach trying to make sure that I'm communing with God and trying to be real before Him and other people. So. I think it's good. A little bit is related to kind of how I was talking about this cry to be authentic. Like I said, there's some really good things. A lot of us in the PCA grew up in moralistic backgrounds where we just acted like everything is okay when it's not. And so there's a very real place for that. But I think if we're not careful, then that can very easily follow the culture, which is more into the self-help. And we've seen a shift since when I was a kid that even in the culture, you talk about your struggles and you talk about things. But I think for the Christian, if we stay with the struggle, and that's all that we have, then we don't have the fullness of the biblical message. And so I get a little concerned when I hear things like embracing your brokenness, and I don't hear the rest of the story, because the gospel is not embrace your brokenness. The gospel is Jesus died for your brokenness. And in fact, He actually wants to make you new and put you back together again. And so I think we have to keep those balanced. So I think some of those cultural trends, wanting to relate to people in real ways, oftentimes out of really good motives, can actually be a real kind of subtle danger. I think another subtle danger is just we really love the world. The sin that's still in us really loves the world. And so I think we have to be on guard about all those kinds of things. Yeah, the first thing I would say to someone going through seminary is, as busy as you are and all the demands that you have, is really do make time to cultivate those personal practices of Bible reading and of prayer, to even pray that you would well, first of all, get involved in a church. That's really important. Don't assume that the seminary is going to sanctify you, because it won't. You need the local church. And you also need to go to the local church as a receiver, not a critiquer. And as a young guy, I know how challenging that is, but you gotta pray, and God will be faithful if you go with good motives. And so learn to feed yourself, but also seek those pastors who are going to feed you. And I think it can be a challenge sometimes, but really try to find a pastor or even an older elder in one of those congregations that they get involved in, and really have a mentor. I mean, have friends at seminary, but especially an older mentor. I know that was very valuable. When I was in Philadelphia, I had several elders that I knew fairly well. One was the guy who hosted a Bible study I led my whole time in seminary, and just to get together informally for breakfast and to talk about life and to learn from him, because he'd been an elder for many years. So I think those things are vital for someone going to seminary. And so relish the academic side of things. We need to have good answers and to know our faith better than ever in our day and age, I think. But that's not all we need. We also need to put it into practice. And what's the old adage that the longest distance is from the head to the heart? And that can really be true in seminary. So just to begin to find those ways to make that journey from the head to the heart, even as you're going through your training, are really, really vital.